Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword. Today we are looking at the first look of the Rings of Power.
Build me a army worthy of Mordor.
So we have just had our first look at the Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power show brought to us by Vanity Fair, so I will be having a breakdown of what they have released and give some initial thoughts on it. There have been a few interesting things revealed from the article, but I will work my way through it first and then kind of address everything at the end to make things easier. So, the first image we get is of a certain Morvith Clark, as Galadriel wearing some stunning armour, again like we saw in the character reveal posters not long ago, but this time we get a wider image of it with her face in as well. Also this time she appears to be armed with a different sword as opposed to the dagger that she held in that poster. From the initial part of the article, it gives the feeling that the beginning of the show will very much focus on this character, and they even say how she is not the same Galadriel as the one we meet in The Lord of the Rings. This one is younger, more brash, and has a certain amount of anger inside of her. We are told that by episode 2 there will have been a split between her and her people, and she will make her way to Middle-earth, and get caught in a storm while on a raft travelling over the Sundering Seas, which are the seas that lay between Aman and Middle-earth for those of you who weren't sure. In the text it is said she makes this journey by the way of the Halcaraxe, the ice passage to the very north, but perhaps this has been slightly altered for the show, as somehow she is now on the water. What is also different here is how it is said she has been caught in this storm alongside a mortal castaway. This character is named Halbrand, and they are played by Charlie Vickers, who is a character completely new for the show. The line in the article describes it as, Galadriel is fighting for the future, Halbrand is running from the past. The article then goes on to talk a bit about the cost of the show and the pressure that comes with that, as well as their experience with having to halt production due to the COVID outbreak. But the crew took inspiration by the portrayal of Galadriel when she says how she has to fight. Vanity Fair even reveal here that they have seen the first 3 episodes of the show, so I am incredibly jealous of that. But then here we then get a larger reveal of 3 characters. Prince Durin IV, played by Owain Arthur, Princess Disa, the dwarf played by Sophia Nomvet, and Arondir, the Sylvan elf played by Ismael Cruz Cordova. It's great to finally get to see some faces and names to the characters, but it is also interesting to note that 2 of these 3 reveals are original characters for the show. And something else that kind of piqued my interest when looking at this is that it says this character of the dwarf is Durin IV. And for those of you who do not know, it is Durin III who is the first dwarf to receive a Dwarven Ring of Power. So I really thought that he was going to be the one more likely to have been involved at this point, of maybe to be the dwarf that was revealed, not Durin IV. But the reasoning behind this I'm not really sure of, and we'll just have to wait and see why this was the case and how it turns out. You never know, it might have just been a typo in the text. Unlikely, but you never know. Then the next image we get is of Galadriel and Halbrand amongst the waves on their raft. Again, I do not quite understand how this situation will arise, but that is something that we will just have to wait and see for. Then there is more of a discussion about how the team came across the material that they have used, and with a bit of the backstory of how Tolkien added the appendices into The Lord of the Rings for more background information at massive requests from his fans after the initial release of The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers. And after that, how Christopher took more of his notes that he didn't release to eventually publish the Silmarillion. They even address Christopher's fear of the commercialization of his father's works. A risky move to bring this up, all things considering with Amazon. However, over time Christopher did begin to let more lucrative bids for the rights of the works come in, albeit only part of the work at a time, which is how the show ended up with the Second Age rights and not much else. Now we get another image, this time of Robert Arameo as Elrond. Here he is described as a politically ambitious young elven leader. And I will address his short haircut too, as I know that will appear in the comments section. It seems an unusual choice to change for a few reasons. In the History of Middle-earth series we learn that the Vanyar had blonde hair, the Noldor had dark hair and sometimes red hair, and the Teleri, the Sindar and Sylvan, have dark or silver hair. Which is also interesting to note that, therefore, in the Lord of the Rings movie, Legolas should technically not have been blonde. In fact, he should have probably had silver hair, even though Legolas's hair colour is never specifically recorded in the texts. But at that time, I do wonder if many people really cared about that decision. We don't really know. But anyway, back to the article. They talk a bit more about the budget side of things then, and then we move on to our next image of Bronwyn, played by Nazanin Bonaidi, and her forbidden love, Arondir, in the village of Tir Harad. So, is Tir Harad in the lands of Harad, near to the lands? Is it anything to do with Harad, or is it just some other random village? We aren't sure yet. And why is their love forbidden? Is it purely an elf mortal thing? Maybe? I just really hope that they have learned from the past when making these decisions. But moving on again. Next is a mention of the showrunners, McKay and Payne, and it says how they are huge fans of the original material and very passionate about it. Now I know they can just say these things, and they will say these things, it's not like they would say they didn't enjoy the original material, but hopefully this is truly the case and that does then come across in the show. In the article they even say, Patrick and I will often look at each other in challenging moments of the show and say, I'm glad you're with me, Sam. Next is another image, this time of Elrond and Galadriel reuniting in Lindon. There is not too much to draw from this apart from more of the same about their appearance. But then we get another one just after this, and this time it's of Bronwyn on her own, with it being labelled as Bronwyn is a single mother and healer, seen here in her apothecary in Middle-earth's Southlands. Again hinting she may well be from the lands we know less about, maybe like that of Harad. This is where we start to learn a bit more on the reveal side. They talk about their surprise that despite the text being 66 years old, it is still very unfamiliar to so many people that, in fact, it could still be spoiled to a lot of them. It meant that so much was to be done in secret, even having cast members hired without knowing who they were even going to play. And the next point is an interesting one, as it covers the much talked about moment of the Tolkien scholar Tom Shippey leaving the show. Obviously this is just one side of the story, but it is basically described that he left because he broke his NDA by talking about the details of what the show could or could not show at all. And, to Amazon, no one was above signing an NDA, so he had to go. So from that point on as well, they decided to not share any information of any of the scholars working on the show from that point onwards. So like I said, that may not be the entire story, there may be more to it, but that is Amazon's, or at least the showrunner's side anyway, and due to there being NDAs signed, I can somehow doubt that Tom Shippey will be making any statements himself anytime soon. Then in the article they also address the loss of the actors and crew, making people aware that this is not actually an uncommon thing to happen in the video and movie production world, and it is really nothing to worry about, even referring to how Stuart Townsend was replaced after the filming had even started in The Lord of the Rings, being replaced obviously by Viggo Mortensen, and look how good of a decision that turned out to be. Our next image is the one that caught my eye the most when first scrolling through the article. The unusually dressed men. It is labelled as Director J.A. Bayona points the way for two nomadic hunters wandering the fields of Middle-earth. And just to make everyone aware, as some people haven't seemed to know, nomadic just means someone living the life of a wanderer basically. But the strange wing-like things that they have strapped on them, that I do not really know anything about at this point. My guess is it relates to some kind of tribe-related thing or something that may help them camouflage while hunting, but that is just pure guesswork. I would love to know what you think about that though in the comment section below. Next we get an image of McKay and Payne on set, and a guarantee from them that there will be no Game of Thrones level of violence and sex. This is Middle-earth. This is different. The show should appeal to all ages, even if there may be some scarier moments within it. And after this they then address the issue of the Hobbits. They say they have introduced the Hobbit ancestors of this era, who are the Harfoots, and that they will be basically doing their own things, kind of avoiding everyone else. So they may appear as more of a side story as opposed to being shoehorned into the main narrative, with again us getting confirmation that Lenny Henry will be playing a Hobbit elder within this group. They just felt that they could not leave out Hobbits out of any kind of Middle-earth production at this point. A bold choice? A risky choice? But until it appears on a screen in front of my eyes, I will not jump to any conclusions. And talking of choices, the multicultural casting aspect is addressed next, and I will quote this part from the article itself to save from any misunderstandings. Obviously there was going to be push and backlash, says Tolkien scholar Marina Rios Maldonado. But the question is from whom? Who are these people that feel so threatened or disgusted by the idea that an elf is black or Latino or Asian? They do not hang around on this subject too long though, and move on to stating how we will be seeing the full glory of Khazad-dûm within the show as a polar opposite to the state that we witness it in the Fellowship of the Ring movie. And then I will also quote this next bit from the article. The show will explore that kingdom when it was still full of light, food and music. It will also bring the elven smith Celebrimbor, Charles Edwards, to life as his skill with metals and magic lead to the forging of the rings. And a canny young elven architect and politician named Elrond, Robert Arameo, will rise to prominence in the mystical capital of Lindon. Another storyline will follow a sailor named Isildur, Maxim Baldry, years before he becomes a warrior and cuts the soul-corrupting ring off Sauron's hand, then falls victim to its powers himself. Now this is where one of the biggest points to me arises. They say how the events of the show take place over thousands of years in the writings. However, they have made the creative decision to compress those events into a shorter period of time of about 200 years for the show. They cite the reason for this being that any human characters would be dying off and the new ones having to be introduced every season if they did it over this thousands of years period of time. And I can kind of understand their reasoning for that. However, it is a point I'm unsure of how it is really going to affect things, as they then end the article with saying, "We think the work will eventually speak for itself." So, will it speak highly of itself, or will it turn into the biggest flop in TV and streaming history? We will have to wait and see. So there are a few things to go over now that we have come to the end of the article. And I will not go too deeply into things, as I'm sure there will be plenty of time for that later, but it's good to address them. So firstly, the idea of Elrond being a highly ambitious political character just feels a bit wrong to me. That's not really how I see him being as a character, and it will be interesting to see how they manage to try and do this to his character, unless that is of course they just completely change who Elrond is to us. Also, I do not understand what they are doing with Galadriel's story at this point. We know how she journeyed into Middle-earth, and we know who with, being her brothers by way of the Halcaraxë. So now being on a raft in the sea with a man seems a little out of left field, but again without any context it feels too much to judge it without more information. I'm a little more worried about the elf-woman love story from experience. However, that is not to say again that there is not more to it and it won't be the same disaster that The Hobbit made. Again, more information before judgment is needed. One of the other big things is again the changing of the timeline. This may change things very dramatically. However, this is where we address the situation of this being an adaptation and not a word-for-word remake when things come into it. Remember also, there are many big gaps with no information for the Second Age, so there was always going to be points that they would have had to have filled in, or had very weird massive jumps in time without much going on. Or again potentially, where instead they then chose to cut it down, and so they condensed it. We will have to see if this is a decision that backfires, as it is one that will really affect the story far more than something else, like elven hair, so it is one that I am a bit more wary of. But only time will tell right now. And finally, I will address this, the whole issue of diversity. This is one that I've said before I am not personally too bothered by, but I know it causes the biggest debate for some reason. Will it change the story? No. Will it change the production quality? No. Will it change the script? No. Might they add it into areas where it may not be needed when they could have done it somewhere else? Probably. Could it go against some of Tolkien's descriptions? Potentially yes. However, I feel these things do not condemn his work. I very much am intrigued to see how it is done. It may upset some of the purists, but the way I think of it is, as I will reiterate again, this is an adaptation, not a word-for-word remake. The Peter Jackson The Lord of the Rings was exactly the same. Things get altered, characters change, moments change. All I care about is that this could introduce a whole new generation and wave of people to Tolkien's works, and that it is a show that I can enjoy. If watching this show makes someone who knew little of Tolkien go out and buy the Silmarillion, and then find and then dive into Middle-earth that way, and afterwards discover the original way that it was written, then that is a great thing to me. If it makes them want to know more about the world, that is great. If the show comes out and it is awful, I will 100% call it out on that. People say there may be red flags, but until I watch it myself, I will not judge a book by its cover, when really we've barely even had a cover yet. I will be cautious, but remain optimistic. And now I know that may upset some people. I mean, our live stream on this just lost us many subscribers, but I'm not blindly in love with the show regardless. But like I said, I will be excited about it until I have watched it and taken things in for myself, making my own opinion, and hopefully beyond that too. I will hold on to my hopes until I have absorbed the Rings of Power with my own eyes and not a moment earlier. The Lord of the Rings movies shaped my life. It set me on my career path, so the thought of this show doing the same for other people cannot be the worst thing in the world, when I'm sure there were many people talking against it before those movies were released. And so that is where I will end things for today, with my look at the first look images and interviews conducted by Vanity Fair for the Rings of Power show. Like I said, The Lord of the Rings is so important to so many people, it is almost impossible to live up to that. That is a part of a problem that The Hobbit suffered with. It was just trying to be another The Lord of the Rings when it needed to be its own thing. Albeit, that's only one part of the many problems that that trilogy had. It will be its own show, its own production, and realistically its own new universe of a non-canon adaptation. Therefore, I'm sure everything I've said here will have raised up some strong opinions in many of you. So now here, please let me know all of your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below, but please try to keep it clean. And now before I go, firstly I want to mention our other channels that I will link in the description below, and also to shout out our patrons who have all been amazing. Firstly, our Divine Power tier members of Kevin, Abram and Matt, you are all awesome, and a big thanks to our Fire Demon tier members of Nashith, Denversteel and Gregory, and as well I cannot forget the Wizard Staff tier members of John, Andrew and Finrod Felagund. Every single one of you is a true legend of the Brohirrim. So finally, if you've managed to reach the very end of this video with me today, why not drop a like on it, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon too so that you could be notified of all future uploads. And once again, I will say thank you if you've managed to reach the very end with me, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.